The Seahawks have a massive game coming up tonight in prime time. San Francisco 49ers visiting Lumen Field. The 49ers looking to win the NFC West. What can the Seahawks do to stay in the division title hunt and keep their playoff hopes alive with a primetime victory? I'll be breaking that down and answering a bunch of listener questions on a bonus Locked On Seahawks mailbag.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, your host for Locked On Seahawks. Happy game day to all the 12s out there. The Seahawks getting ready to face off against the first place 49ers in primetime. Thursday night football at Lumen Field. The Seahawks desperately need to win this football game. They won't win the NFC West if they lose tonight. The 49ers would clinch the division, and it would put the Seahawks at 500 at 7-7. They still would have plenty of chances coming up to make the postseason, but it would be a significant loss for their chances of playing beyond week 18. So there's a lot at stake tonight, and keeping that in mind, didn't get a mailbag segment this week because we have a shortened week and decided to do a bonus episode here, all Q&A, answering a ton of listener questions heading into tonight's game. And of course, plenty of off-season related questions. Looking at the Seahawks right now, who have been struggling with 3 losses in their last 4 games. I'll answer as many as I can on this bonus episode. It is brought to your way by Simply Safe. When it comes to burglars, your home is like the end zone, and you need the absolute strongest defense you can muster. This is why I use and trust Simply Safe Home Security. At Simply Safe, your safety is the only thing that matters. It's cutting-edge technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who always have your back, so you always know your home is safe. Simply Safe keeps my home safe with the best technology available, including the ability to control my system from my phone, watch my security cameras in crystal clear HD, and use a variety of high-tech sensors for the best quality protection. And the best part, with the 24/7 professional monitoring, Simply Safe's agents call you the moment a threat is detected and dispatch police or first responders in an emergency, even if you're not home or can't be reached. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL. Save 20% on your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan, and get your first month free. Visit simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more. There's no safe like Simply Safe. All right, let's get this bonus Q&A episode going here on Locked On Seahawks. Before I answer my first question, we do have some breaking news heading into tonight's game. The Seahawks have announced 1 practice squad elevation. Running back Godwin Igwebuike will be playing for the second time in 5 days. Had a really impressive Seahawks debut on Sunday against the Panthers as a kick returner. It gives Seattle a little extra insurance. Sounds like maybe DJ Dallas is not going to be dressing for a second straight game. They do expect to have Ken Walker III. Have Igwebuike there as an insurance policy at running back, and obviously did really well returning kicks. Had 2 kick returns past the 40-yard line. One of them went past midfield and set the Seahawks up for one of their touchdowns in the first half on Sunday. So good for Igwebuike, a chance to maybe etch out a position on the roster for the remainder of the season if he impresses returning kicks again tonight against one of his former teams, the 49ers. All right, let's get to your questions. The first one coming from James J.Y., and he tweets, if Seattle limited the run like they had after the New Orleans game, they would still be leading the NFC West. There's a lot to be excited for in coming seasons, rebuild or reload. What are the major holes in this team that are preventing them from being elite? Well, going into this season, nobody thought the Seahawks are going to be competing for a playoff spot, let alone be elite. So obviously there are holes on this roster, but I think now that we are near the end of the season, we really get a good picture where the Seahawks are struggling the most. I think the number one need for this football team is still at the center position. And Austin Blythe, in some regards, has been an upgrade on what they've had at center the last 3 or 4 years. But I still think that is a position they absolutely need to invest a high draft pick, get a guy who can come in that is more dominant in the run game, can hold up in pass protection, and can handle the communication aspect. That's where Blythe is at his very best. He has helped the Seahawks a lot in that regard. They just need a more physically imposing player there. And I think on the trench side of things defensively, if you're going to run this hybrid 3-4 defense, you've got to have an alpha dog that's playing the 3-tech position at defensive tackle. And there's some pretty good ones in this upcoming draft class, especially the Seahawks looking like they're going to have a top 3 or top 5 draft pick. Might have a chance at Jalen Carter from Georgia, who I think is the best defensive tackle in this draft class. Will Anderson, an edge rusher, also would be somebody that would make sense. They need to add someone else to go with Uchenna Nwosu. Boy, Mafe and Darrell Taylor could still end up being major contributors, but we haven't seen that yet to this point from either one of those former second-round picks. So I think they need to add another dynamic talent that can rush off the edge that fits this scheme. Will Anderson's a player I think can play in any scheme in the NFL, one of the best players in this draft class. And I think if you look at other positions, maybe safety, because of Jamal Adams' injury history, Quandre Diggs getting to be a little bit older player, might make some sense to invest a pick there in the early rounds as well. But I really think that center, guard, defensive tackle, and edge rusher, the trenches is where this Seahawks team really need to invest. And some might argue for a quarterback, but there are other areas that are much more significant needs for the Seahawks team moving beyond 2022 into the future. Next question from Katie Ellis. Speaking of quarterbacks tweets, if the Seahawks lose out, hope they don't, would that change how they proceed at quarterback next year? Well, really, that depends on how Geno Smith plays. If the Seahawks end up losing out and Geno Smith is a big part of it, throws a lot of interceptions, really regresses, then maybe the Seahawks change their tune and think, you know what, we're going to go into next year with a little bit different direction of quarterback. We are going to use that really high draft pick on a signal caller. Maybe we can bring back Geno Smith at a much cheaper price in that case. I think he would absolutely have to discombobulate these last 4 games, though, for that to happen. I think he, at least for the next year or two, is part of Seattle's future as the quarterback. He's 32, but you got to remember he didn't play very many snaps for 7 years. So he is a young 32, and his style of quarterback, he can run when he needs to, but he's not a scrambling quarterback. He's more of a pocket quarterback. Those players tend to be able to play longer in the NFL too. So I think there is potential for him to be a guy with what he has shown this year from week 1 till now that he can be their franchise guy potentially. So I would be surprised if they go a different route. If he just absolutely stinks the next 4 games, then that can change the way that the front office views the quarterback position. However, now, Laurent Lem here, our next question. Laurent Lem on YouTube. If we are out of the playoff hunt, should we start Drew Lock for a game to see what we have in case Geno gets too expensive? So this is the other side of the coin here, the way this question is framed, because if Geno Smith's going to be asking for more than $30 million per year, which I think right now he has every right to ask for that with the way he has played this season, if the Seahawks lose a couple more games, they get eliminated from the playoffs, you know, you could maybe consider that possibility, but I think there's absolutely no way that's going to happen unless Geno Smith gets injured and they decide that they want to rest him and they want to see what Drew Lock can do in that situation with nothing else to play for. I don't see it happening, though. I think Geno Smith is going to be the starter for the rest of the season as long as he is healthy, regardless of playoff status for the Seahawks. Just don't see that happening. Nick Richens, our next question here. What wins and losses from the Seahawks and other teams in the NFC are needed for the Hawks to make the playoffs? So this is actually a pretty simple situation for Seattle right now. Even though they went 0-4 against the NFC South, teams like the Panthers and the Falcons, they still are 5-8. They have much worse records than the Seahawks. If they had the same records, the Seahawks would lose out the tiebreaker. The Saints have a worse record as well. So those losses ultimately are going to hurt them in the win-loss column, but they're not going to have to worry about those teams trying to snatch a wild card spot away from them because the Seahawks have a far superior record. The team that you have to watch right now is the Giants because the Giants have a better record. They have a tie instead of that extra loss. The Seahawks did beat them earlier this year, so you would like to see the Giants lose to the Commanders this weekend so that Seattle can have that tiebreaker. And the Detroit Lions, Seattle has a tiebreaker on them, but they've been red hot. If they keep winning games here down the stretch, they might sneak into the playoffs. Seattle would like to see them lose another game or two as well. So those are really the two teams I'd keep an eye on. And the Commanders, if they weren't playing the Giants, you'd like to see them lose games as well if you're not going to win the NFC West. So those are really the 3 teams that I would keep an eye on in terms of the Seahawks' chances of winning the wild card. If they beat the 49ers tonight, then they're going to be rooting for San Francisco to lose 2 of their final 3 and hoping that they can win 2 of their final 3, and then they would win the NFC West. So it's an interesting dynamic. I don't know that the Seahawks are going to be able to win this division, but they're going to be hoping that the 49ers really slip up down the stretch if they're able to get the upset at Lumen Field tonight. Otherwise, you got to be looking at the Giants and Commanders. Those are the two teams really that are battling for that last wild card spot with the Seahawks. Lions in the mix there as well in the NFC. Dylan Mitchell tweets, do you think Seattle will invest a mid-round pick into the cornerback position to complement Tariq Woolen, or do you think Pete Carroll feels that the long-term answer is already on the team? I think the Seahawks treat cornerback kind of like they do running back. It feels like almost every year they draft one, but it's typically in the later rounds, and I can see the Seahawks doing that again, especially with the number of picks they have. I could see them going after another project developmental corner next year, not thinking it's going to be the next Tariq Woolen, but drafting a player that's got some tools and skills and football acumen that they're looking for at the position, fit size-wise. I could see them taking a flyer on a player like that on day 3. I don't expect anything earlier than that, though, because I still think Trey Brown is who they hope becomes the other starter because of the knee injury he was coming back from middle of the season. He's kind of struggled these first couple of games back, and nobody should have expected him to just hit the ground running because of the injury he was coming off of. But I expect that he is going to be the guy across from Tariq Woolen starting in 2023, if not the end of this season. There's a chance that he could replace Mike Jackson, and Jackson's been good most of the year, but he hasn't been playing quite as well as of late, and Trey Brown just has a higher ceiling. So I think at some point that job is going to become his at the left cornerback position. Seattle hopes those two corners, Brown and Woolen, will grow together, and they can draft some other players to develop behind them that can also play special teams and give them depth. I think that's how they're viewing the position rather than thinking we need to get another starter here. They still believe in Trey Brown. Joey Easterbrook on YouTube. Do you think it's possible we revert back to 4-3 hybrid next year based on how Clint Hurtt's system has performed this year? Is it possible? Sure. But the Seahawks have really been playing a 3-4 hybrid for the last several seasons. Late in Ken Norton's tenure as well. They've always had 3-4 principles in Pete Carroll's 4-3 defense. I could see them reverting back and getting back to having some personnel that fits that former scheme, more 4-3 looks that they ran for a long time under Pete Carroll. That's certainly possible, but I think they'll probably be leaning more towards let's get the personnel that we need sharpened up for this scheme. Because again, I mentioned this a few minutes ago, one thing that would really help this football team is if they got an alpha dog at defensive tackle that could rush the passer, could stuff the run, can 2-gap, 1-gap. They need an elite talent at that position that fits the scheme, and I think that would help everybody else on the defense. Maybe you bring in somebody to push Cody Barton. Barton's going to be a free agent after this year as well, so maybe Seattle just starts over at that position. We'll have to wait and see what they choose to do there. I think Barton's played better as of late, but there still are plenty of missed opportunities, it seems like, each week. So they may feel in this draft class with plenty of depth at linebacker that they can find somebody else that can jump in and play. That might be another position of significant need going into this next season next to Jordan Brooks. So I think that the scheme is probably not going to be altered that much. I think they're going to try to stay the course, but they need to revisit the personnel and see can they find better fits for the scheme that they are trying to run. And the coaching staff's got to do a better job having their defense prepared for the start of games as well. They've shown they can make adjustments as the game progresses, but the start of games have been pretty rough. So there's a number of things that need to happen on that front. Next question from CSTTV. Mike Jackson seems pedestrian out there lately. How is Trey Brown's recovery coming along, and would he be the future at left corner? So I kind of touched on this a few questions ago, looking at corner in the draft next year. I would not be surprised at this point if Trey Brown gets thrown in the starting lineup in the next couple of weeks if Mike Jackson continues to struggle. And I don't even know if struggle is the right word. He's had a couple of games where he has given up a bunch of catches, but he hasn't necessarily been dominated. I feel like the passing defense has been fine for the Seahawks. They just haven't been able to stop any run games, and that's put them in really bad spots in the second half. The Raiders lost, and then last week against the Panthers. The passing defense has been fine, in my opinion, but they've got to shore up other parts of their defense. The front seven's really struggled. The tackling across the board was poor last week. So I don't know that the Seahawks are going to look at that position and think we absolutely need to make this change right now. But I think that there's a chance we could see with Trey Brown getting more reps under his belt at practice. That is the player they want to be their starter at left corner. At some point, I think they are going to give him back the keys to left corner and have him across from Tariq Woolen, whether that's next week, whether that's tonight, I guess we'll see. But Mike Jackson's done a solid job this year as a starter. I just don't know that he's their long-term answer at that position at this point. They believe Trey Brown can still be that guy. We've got a question here from Coach T. Bates on YouTube. Why is nobody talking about Jawan Jennings and Ray McCloud for the 49ers? They have more weapons than Ayuk, George Kittle, and Juszczyk, and also mentions their corners are good. Well, I will say this, Coach T. Bates. We talked about the corners plenty when we looked at matchup Tuesday this week. And their corners have been really solid, especially Shavarius Ward has been a really nice addition at corner. Their safeties have exceeded expectations as well. The secondary has really been fortified, which is a big part of this defense being number one in a number of key categories. This is the best defense in the NFL, in my opinion, and it's not close. So Seattle's going to have to deal with that. As far as the receivers, you mentioned Ray McCloud, played for the Steelers previously, was a really good special teams player, has gotten more opportunities on offense. You got to respect the player. I just don't view him as a guy that's going to be a major problem for the Seahawks. Jennings has been a problem in the past because of his size. So that is a player that could be an X factor with Deebo Samuel being out. So I'm glad that you mentioned that name. Both those guys may get opportunities catching passes from Brock Purdy, but it really boils down to the run defense first and foremost for Seattle. If they can't slow down San Francisco's run game, it's not going to matter what receivers on the outside for the 49ers and how the Seahawks handle them. It's going to be a long night. The run game is the first priority, and then you can worry about trying to defend a receiving core that I think is better than advertised, but without Deebo Samuel, it's not necessarily a elite group either. Next question from Denko44. This one also coming off of YouTube. Thoughts on trading back one of Seattle's first-round picks to get more picks later on? With edge, linebacker, and running back being deep this year, it could make some sense. Of course, any draft, you can look at that opportunity. I think it just really, it's one of those things until we actually are to draft season in April, when the actual draft's going on, and see what other teams choose to do. And we really know what the Seahawks picks are. I mean, who knows? Maybe Denver wins a few games down the stretch and Seattle's first picks ends up being 5th or 6th overall. At this point, it's going to be a high pick with the Broncos being 3-10. Seattle's going to get a high draft choice. But depending on where that ends up falling, if a player they love comes off the board and then they have 2 or 3 players they really like, maybe they try to trade down and recoup some other high picks. That's a possibility. The other first rounder, depending if they make the playoffs or not, if they're in the 20s, John Schneider more times than not finds ways to trade down to recoup picks there. It just depends on what they view this draft class in terms of depth and stuff. Are there 2 players that are worth staying put and drafting in the first round? If they have multiple players that they like, or they feel like there's a lot of second round grades, let's trade back, they absolutely can do that. And John Schneider can recoup some later picks. But until we get to April and we're going to really see what this draft class looks like, it's really difficult to project what John Schneider and company are going to do there. There's a long time till we get to the actual draft and find out that answer. Byron on Twitter, at this stage, do you consider LJ Collier one of the biggest draft busts in Seahawks history? So I'm not going to put him into a category with Rick Mirer and Dan McGuire. Those two, the position they play, quarterback, they are going to be on the Mount Rushmore of Seahawks draft busts. Rashaad Penny has had injuries when he's been healthy the last 2 years, though he's at least looked like a first-round talent. So I don't think that you can mesh him into this group anymore. The Seahawks have had a few other big misses, but McGuire and Mirer are the 2 huge misses. Early 90 quarterback selections, first round, neither one of them panned out. Mirer had a really solid rookie year and then just fell apart after that. McGuire didn't even throw 3 touchdown passes in the NFL. So that pick was a complete waste. Those 2 are by themselves. But I think that next tier down with Aaron Curry and LJ Collier, I think you have to lump him in there. I mean, the Seahawks used a first round pick on him. And even the player that was drafted before him, Jerry Tillery, who the Chargers released earlier this year because he wasn't meeting expectations and disappointed them, Tillery has 3 times as many sacks as LJ Collier. So I think that when you look at the stats and just the lack of impact that he's had, the number of games he's been a healthy scratch, you don't do that with first-round picks unless they're completely underwhelming. So, unfortunately, that's the truth. He has to be lumped in that next category in terms of busts. He has definitely not come close to meeting the expectations the Seahawks had. And quite frankly, when they made the selection, I had a third-round grade, maybe late second grade on him. Thought that was a reach picking him that point, but the Seahawks now, looking back, probably could have gone a different direction, maybe had a little bit more success. But that draft kind of was one of those where after the first 25 picks or so, things seemed to dry up, at least on the defensive line. There was tons of defensive line talent that went off the board early, and Seattle wanted Dexter Lawrence, who went to the Giants a few picks before their first rounder, ended up trading down because they didn't get the player they wanted. Noah Fant was another one they liked. Now they ironically have him. So that draft didn't necessarily play out the way the Seahawks wanted it to, and they ended up settling for Collier, and the pick just hasn't worked out. That's the reality. Next question here coming from Justin on Twitter. Should our defensive strategy for this week be more of a 3-across man while stacking the box to stop the run? Trust our DBs to shut down Brock Purdy in the passing game and focus on gap integrity. Well, I do think from the run defense perspective, having that extra defender up in the box when you're playing single high coverages, middle of field closed coverages, it helps you because you have that extra body up there and you can stuff the run, hopefully doing that. But it also creates some issues when you look at what the 49ers are good at, because George Kittle against two deep coverages, it gives you a little better chance to defend seam routes. Single high coverage, there's going to be more holes there for the 49ers to be able to throw the ball downfield to their tight end, to their slot players. And so it depends what the Seahawks choose to do. Pick your poison here. I do think playing more single high coverages, getting that extra guy up in the box, is going to benefit them trying to slow down San Francisco's run game. The question is, can they still play the coverage in the back half with one less guy back deep? The Seahawks had to make that determination going in this game. I think the way they played against Carolina, though, having that extra guy, that's probably what they should prioritize doing more often than not. But we'll see what happens, because the 49ers still have a number of weapons in the passing game that can take advantage of that. It's really a pick your own poison thing when you're playing against one of the better teams in the NFL, the San Francisco 49ers. All right, wrapping up this bonus Q&A, our last question, and I wanted to finish up with this one because it gets excited about the game tonight. You know, it ramps up excitement a little bit. Bronson tweets, what are K9's stats going to be today? So we're talking Ken Walker III. He's going to play. Was not on the final injury report after missing Sunday's game against the Panthers. He's expected to be out there starting for Seattle. We don't know where he's at health-wise. I'm assuming he's not 100%, but he's healthy enough to play. And this 49ers defense, it is tough sledding to run against them. They're number one in the NFL in rushing defense. They have not allowed a team to run for above 70 yards since week 7 when they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's been almost half a season since the 49ers gave up more than 70 rushing yards in a game. This is a dominant front seven. Their safeties and corners can tackle as well. It's just an elite defense. And Seattle has not been able to run the football against anybody in the last month. It's been since early November, the last time they had a running back go over 37 rushing yards individually in a game. It has been really rough conditions for Seattle trying to get their run game going. So you consider that. Feels like this is not a good game for Ken Walker III to be able to get this run game going. At the same time, rivalry games, Seattle seems to have a little bit more success against the 49ers. There were some moments where the run game looked like he was starting to find some traction when these two teams played in week 2. They just couldn't get that rhythm consistently on offense in that game and wound up not scoring any points. I'm going to go with 15 carries for 55 yards, and I think K9 scores a touchdown tonight. I do think he gets into the end zone. I just don't expect to see a very healthy yards per carry average, but I do expect the Seahawks are going to come out and they're going to try to get that run game going because they have no choice. You can't be one-dimensional against a defense of this talent. They're going to have to be patient. If running the ball is not working early, you've got to stick with it while also entrusting Geno Smith to win the football game for you, because this is a passing-oriented offense. That's the strength of their team, but they've got to be able to get a little bit of offensive balance. That's going to be easier said than done, but I'll put 15 for 55 and a touchdown. Not the best game of Walker's rookie season, but I think the Seahawks will find a way to get a little bit of success running the ball. Will it be enough to win? Who knows? The 49ers are going to be heavily favored in this game, and quite frankly, I think are the better football team heading into this matchup, but playing at home, Seattle's hoping they can get some Lumen Field magic that's been missing for a good portion of this season. As always, you can follow me on Twitter, Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to check out Locked On Seahawks and Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and streaming 5 days a week on YouTube. We're going to have a postcast coming tonight, a couple hours after the game. It'll be a little bit late for our fans on the East Coast, but we'll have our game balls on offense, defense, special teams, 3 up, 3 down, and instant analysis, whether the Seahawks win or lose. It's going to be happening tonight. That link is already up on our YouTube page, and we will have the audio available on all of their platforms as well. Hope to see you tonight. Enjoy the football game. Go Hawks.